Throughout history, land has changed hands. Through war or through peace, certain areas of land just change ownership. The names might have simply changed, or that nation broke apart, were invaded, or an alliance shattered under the strains of life. But whatever the reason, whatever the consequence, these nations no longer exist. And now we will look at 5 nations that do not exist today. We will look at what caused their rise and their eventual fall. We will look at the history that made those nations what they were before they all fell apart. So let's start at number 5. Number 5. Austria-Hungary. The former country of Austria-Hungary was created in 1867 by the union of the Austrian Empire and the Kingdom of Hungary. It was located in Central and Eastern Europe and was also known as the dual monarchy, referring to the way the empire was essentially multiple countries. The new empire was a collection of 11 different ethnic groups and was a bilingual country that was formed with the Austro-Hungarian Compromise on the 30th of March, 1867. The dual monarchy system saw that all aspects of the country was run separately, except for a joint military and joint foreign affairs. However, this would not stop the empire becoming a powerful state. It was the second largest country in Europe, the 4th largest machine building industry in the world, and the 3rd largest exporter of electrical appliances for commercial and domestic use. But this was not to last. The Austria-Hungary Empire was one of the central powers in World War I. The empire declared war against the Kingdom of Serbia in 1914, and this eventually led to its dissolution. By 1918, the empire was dissolving under the strains of the war and was eventually destroyed with the armistice of Villagusti in November 1918. After the fall of the empire, multiple new states were born in its place. For example, the First Austrian Republic, the Kingdom of Hungary was reborn, the First Czechoslovak Republic, and the Kingdom of Yugoslavia were some. This was the end of the empire in Europe, known as Austria-Hungary. Number 4. The Confederate States of America. The Confederate States of America was an unrecognized republic in North America that existed from 1861 to 1865. The Confederate States of America was formed when 7 southern states declared secession from the United States of America over the topic of slavery. The northern states of the USA wanted to abolish slavery, whilst the 7 southern states were still heavily reliant on slavery for their economy. This led to a disagreement in which the CSA left the USA. The American Civil War was to follow. The Southern Confederate States struggled to raise an army from nothing against the established military of the USA. However, new states joined the original 7 after the beginning of the Civil War, bringing the total to 11 official states and a further 2 unofficial members. The Civil War began on the 12th of April in 1861 when the Confederates attacked a Union-held fort in South Carolina. Whilst making the first move, the Confederate States were destined to lose. After 4 years of fighting and an estimated 620,000 to 850,000 soldiers passing away, all Confederates had surrendered to the Union. The Union had a total estimated force of 2.2 million military personnel compared to the Confederate number of around 1 million. Despite being vastly outnumbered, the Confederates lasted into the war until 1865, 4 years later. And that is the story of the short-lived but violent history of a nation that no longer exists. Number 3. Korea. The former country of Korea inhabited the Korean Peninsula. The Korean Peninsula has seen many conflicts and many nations rise and fall. Throughout the history of this land, many nations have controlled all or part of this outcrop. Nowadays bordered by Russia and China, the Korean Peninsula was subject to many invasions from different countries including Mongolia and Japan. In 1910, the Empire of Japan conquered the Korean Empire and claimed the land for Japan. This rule lasted until 1945, when the USSR and the USA split the Korean Peninsula along the 38th parallel in an effort to divide Japanese land after its surrender in the preceding war. 2 new states were formed where the old Japanese-controlled state once existed. North Korea and South Korea were formed. North Korea, officially the People's Republic of Korea, was a communist nation backed by the USSR, while South Korea, officially the Republic of Korea, was a Western-style government backed by the USA and its allies. These differences in government and beliefs instantly led to deep difficulties between these 2 conflicting states, originally one unified nation. In 1950, a war broke out. The Korean War was fought between the superpower-backed states, both claiming the entire peninsula as their own. 3 years later, in 1953, no conclusion had been reached, so the battle concluded in a stalemate. However, no official peace treaty was reached. Nowadays, tensions still exist between these states, with both sides still claiming to be the sole legitimate ruler of the entire peninsula. What do you think? Number 2. Gran Colombia. Gran Colombia is the historical name for the state that encompassed much of northern South America and parts of Central America. Officially the Republic of Colombia, historians use the name Gran Colombia as not to confuse this state with modern-day Colombia, also with the official name of the Republic of Colombia. Gran Colombia controlled modern-day Colombia, Ecuador, Panama and Venezuela, along with parts of northern Peru, western Guyana and northwestern Brazil. This state lasted from 1819 to 1831 after many difficulties. Although considering themselves a new state, many countries around the world, mainly from Europe, refused to accept the existence of a new American nation. This only made the internal political arguments even worse. The country was split apart between many different beliefs on how the country should be run. Factions wanted a centralized government, a decentralized government, to remain with the original constitution, a new constitution, or the entire breaking up of the state. Between all these different opposing factions, the country was destined to shatter under the strains of so many separate demands. Separatist movements within the state itself also didn't help. The area of Ecuador felt underrepresented in the central government, but these did not evolve into major problems. Instead, the difficulties arose in Venezuela. In 1826, Venezuela came close to separating from Gran Colombia after a leader was ousted from power during an impeachment trial. This angered many Venezuelans as they supported this leader. Skirmishes broke out throughout Venezuela, but no independence was ever declared. This proved the instability of the state, so in late 1830 and early 1831, when the state finally collapsed after a war with Peru, the different states broke apart and became independent, with the final states of Panama and Colombia becoming separate in 1903. Number 1. USSR. The USSR, or officially the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, was a federal socialist state in northern Eurasia that existed from 1922 until 1991. It was a union of socialist states with a highly centralized government and economy. The capital of the USSR was in Moscow, the largest city of the Soviet Union's largest republic, the Russian Soviet Federative Socialist Republic. This massive nation spanned 11 time zones across 10,000 kilometers from east to west and 7,200 kilometers from north to south. The USSR had territory in much of Eastern Europe, Northern Europe, and all of Northern and Central Asia. The USSR came about after the Second Russian Revolution in 1 year. In 1917, the political party, the Bolsheviks, overthrew the provisional government. The provisional government was put in place as a replacement to the Tsar after the First Revolution in the same year. In 1922, after a civil war, the Bolsheviks consolidated their power and formed a union of nations that were once part of the Russian Empire. This was the beginning of the USSR. The leader of the Bolsheviks came to power, a man called Lenin. He had led the Bolsheviks to power, and after his death, the infamous Joseph Stalin took over. Stalin made many changes to the USSR and implemented the command economy in line with the Communist Party beliefs. This led to rapid economic growth and the improvement of living standards for many people across the USSR. However, as more time passed, new problems arose with the West, and the Cold War dominated many years of the USSR. The Soviet Union was finally weakened beyond repair when a series of revolutions occurred in Europe. The Soviet power was weakened, and the main powerful body in the USSR met to discuss the future of the Union. The Supreme Soviet of the Soviet Union met and formally disbanded the Union in late 1991, after many new reforms lasting years, creating unrest and revolutions. The time of the Soviet Union was over, as many new states emerged from its ruins. Russia became the legal successor of the Soviet Union, which created tension with Ukraine, who also declared themselves the successor. But whoever the legal successor might be, the USSR had collapsed, and all the former states separated and went their different ways. Now that you have seen some of the nations that had fallen due to different circumstances, what do you think? Which one was the most interesting, the most impressive? Or which one was the one destined to collapse? Please discuss in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe and click the bell for notifications to always be up to date with history and the History Scholar.